Minnesota is not very good about talking about race. Because we're too nice, we don't want to be offensive. And unfortunately, that has led to a state that is tremendously wonderful for white people, but is leaving our community members of color behind.
In 2014, city officials in Faribault, Minnesota passed a housing law that some say discriminates against Black people.
Finding housing where the Somali families can live outside of downtown is important, and trying to revitalize downtown with nicer units.
And so we really have to attract higher income people, higher income businesses to be able to balance that out, or we're going to flip like Detroit in a few years.
Thus far, we've had 31 evictions of tenants that can no longer live within the city. So if you want to know, why are we putting more officers on the streets, it's to help fund programs like this, the crime-free multi-housing, and it's to help get rid of some of the, the residents that normally undesirable ones that come with issues.
The ACLU is challenging Faribault's rental licensing ordinance and crime-free housing program. The ordinance requires landlords to conduct criminal background checks on all potential tenants and limits the occupancy of every rental to 2 people per bedroom plus 1 additional person. In some cases, there are simply no rental homes in Faribault for large families. The ACLU says that the ordinance illegally targets the town's African American and Somali populations, and it violates the Fair Housing Act and the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution's 14th Amendment.
Faribault is a pretty typical Minnesota town, small town. It's got a lot of manufacturing, a lot of industry. We have probably one of the largest Somali communities in the nation here in Minnesota. And so there is definitely some culture clashes, I suppose, or some maybe resentment, fear among the white community. A lot of that is what is fueling things like the crime-free ordinance.
Somali refugees began immigrating to Minnesota over 20 years ago at the start of the civil war in Somalia. And since 2000, Faribault's Black population has grown from 2.7% to 9.2%.
The city started getting complaints from the community about crime, particularly in downtown. The police presented a report to the city saying, no, there really isn't any increase in crime. This is about 2 different cultures coming together and there being the dominant white culture feeling fearful of the growing Somali community.
Faribault first enacted the ordinance in 2014, and it's led to the eviction of over 100 residents. In June 2018, the ACLU filed a lawsuit on behalf of 6 individuals and 1 organization, Somali Community Resettlement Services. The ACLU alleges that Thelma Jones's family was forced to leave their apartment after police threatened their landlord with criminal prosecution unless she evicted them. According to the lawsuit, within 1 month of giving birth to her 6th child, Rukia Hussein received a letter from her landlord stating that her family would have to move out of the apartment they had lived in for almost 5 years within 60 days. None of the plaintiffs felt comfortable being interviewed for this story. But this issue affects more than just those who have been evicted.
The city is not ready to reflect the changes that we are facing right now and really to meet the needs of our residents. We have a housing crisis right now. There's a lot of companies here that are willing to hire these hardworking individuals, but then they don't have proper housing. So they're cramped into small rooms. They're actually making it hard for citizens to live and work here and contribute to the economic, the bottom line of the city, which I don't understand at all.
Right now, it affected several friends of mine and also some of my coworkers, whereby plan to move out of Faribault. They moved to Bloomington, some moved to Minneapolis and also the surrounding suburbs, whereby they can get 5-bedroom, 4-bedroom.
I moved to United States on January 2013 because my wife had a refugee status and that's how I joined my family here. As a community, we are not comfortable with the living situation we are, the kind of houses we are living in. I think they just want to put away the immigrants. They don't want diversity. They don't want people of other backgrounds. They don't want Somalis here.
None of the Faribault officials agreed to an interview, but in a statement to HuffPost, the lawyer for the city said, "The purpose or goal of the rental licensing ordinance is to provide decent, safe, sanitary, and crime-free rental housing to all residents of the city, regardless of their race or nationality."
Our plaintiffs want the ordinance declared unconstitutional, declared a violation of the Fair Housing Act. They want it enjoined so that it's no longer being enforced. There seems to be more permission to be racist in our society today. There's a lot of fear of Muslims, of people of color. There's a lot of fear that plays out in policy. We're seeing that on a national stage as well as here in Minnesota.
We just want, people to love each other. All people are human beings, and to tell our fellow Faribaults that we are neighbors. We live here. We are not causing problem, and we just want to live like everyone wants to live. And we're not taking the city. We live here.